Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. I'm joined today by Jack McCallum, who in 1992 was a senior writer for Sports Illustrated. He is also the author of this fantastic book about the 1992 Dream Team, the American basketball national team that played at the Olympic Games in Barcelona. And of course, with Jack today, we will be talking about the Dream Team that played in Barcelona in 1992. Thanks for your time, Jack. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Jack, as I said in the introduction, in 1992, you were a senior writer for Sports Illustrated. So can you explain us how you ended up following the Dream Team?
Well, about 7 or 8 years previous, I was given the NBA beat at Sports Illustrated. That is the professional basketball beat. And at that time, I did not get it because I was so wonderful, or they considered the NBA so wonderful at Sports Illustrated. It was kind of like the fourth sport. There was pro football, there was college football, there was college basketball, there was baseball. And basketball kind of came in there in fourth or fifth place because throughout the 1970s, your listeners or your viewers probably don't understand what a lowly state the NBA was in. People in America didn't, it isn't what it was now. It was, a lot of people thought it was too many black players. Franchises were in trouble. There were too many drugs. People loved college basketball, but they didn't love the NBA. So when I got the beat, it wasn't like, oh, you're going to cover the greatest thing in the world. It was more like, well, yeah, Jack will do a good job on this sport. And it's still kind of back behind baseball and football, but it's kind of growing. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson are in the league, and there's this kid named Michael Jordan coming up. We understand he's going to be pretty good. So the reason that I ended up covering the Dream Team harkens back to me starting to cover the league in 1984-85.
Okay, so in your book at the very beginning, you explain something that a lot of people don't know. So what happened all of a sudden in the early 90s that allowed the pro players of the NBA to play in Olympic Games and international competitions, because in the 80s and even before, they couldn't?
Well, you have to understand how far-fetched the idea of pro in the America, how far-fetched the idea of Americans playing in the Olympics, completely off the radar. Not even anybody's thought. Number one, the NBA had enough problems just existing, the things that I alluded to, that were starting to get rectified in the mid-'80s. Larry and Magic, you cannot overestimate their impact on the league. You can't, whatever you would say about how important they were more important. And number two being Jordan coming into the league. So America had, the NBA had to take care of those things, number one. Number two, there was such a tradition of our college players competing and winning the Olympics. I mean, back to 1960, we had what some people call the first Dream Team, Oscar Robertson and Jerry West, leading us to the gold medal in the Olympics. We had this hiccup in 1972 when we were beaten by the Russians, but, everybody said that was just cheating. We're going to keep winning it. 76, we win in Montreal. 80, there's a boycott. 84 is a great Olympic team. Jordan, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullin, Steve Alford, a bunch of really good guys that swept their way to the gold medal, although without the Soviets. So those things together, it's hard to overemphasize how nobody was thinking about putting the pros with the college game. And as far as I know, only one person in the world was thinking that way. And that was a guy named Boris Stankovic, who was the head of FIBA, who was the one guy that said, basketball will not grow around the world until the best players in the world who are in the NBA join the international community, and i.e. the Olympics. So it is purely, no matter what anybody said, the brainchild of Boris Stankovic, who was a Yugoslavian, who was a bit player on a Yugoslav Olympic team, like that, as Boris put it, I was ninth or 10th guy, I was ninth or 10th guy on, a national team, but it was Boris's vision that first started this idea of the NBA playing in the Olympics.
Well, let me ask you a provocative question. You say in your book that this was the greatest team ever put together, but is it true? Because actually some of the big players, such as Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, were at the end of their career. Actually, Magic Johnson was already retired. So one maybe can argue that the 96 Dream Team with Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway, or the 2012 Dream Team with Kobe Bryant and LeBron James were stronger than this one. What do you think?
Well, I would certainly, you can make that argument. I would not make the argument about the 96 team, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but you could certainly make the argument about the 2012 team. Mm-hmm. I mean, as I wrote the book in 2012, and to that point, it would be hard for me to really see how somebody was as good for this reason. The Dream Team in 92, you mentioned Bird and Magic. They had this perfect storm of guys where they were in their career. You're right. Bird and Magic were at the end of it. However, they furnished the leadership, the maturity, the sort of far end of experience, know-how, all professionalism, all that kind of thing, which is important on a team. And by the way, which is the one thing the 96 team didn't have. Charles Barkley told me himself, hey, I was the most mature guy on that 96 team. That should tell you something, And Charles was crazy, So you had Magic and Bird at the far end of this mature team. And then you had Michael, Scottie Pippen, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Charles Barkley primarily, Ewing, David Robinson, Chris Mullin at the perfect point in their career. They weren't young and they weren't old. So to me, it was not only the playing, the athleticism, the playing ability of all these guys, and the fact that they had Jordan. It was also this idea that they were the perfectly matched team in terms of maturity and youthful enthusiasm. And until you mentioned the Kobe LeBron team, which hadn't yet existed as I was writing this book, my book came out in 2012. Now, would I have still argued the Dream Team was better? I probably would have. But if somebody would say to me, you're crazy, the 2012 team was better, I would say, hey, you can make that argument. I mean, you can do it. And it's been an argument since. How many guys from that era, the 2008, 2012, 2016 teams, how many guys from that team would go on the Dream Team? To which I always say, you can make that argument, but then you got to kick some guys off the Dream Team. Everybody always says, here's 5 guys that should be on. That's fine. Tell me who you're going to kick off. Obviously Christian Laettner, you're going to kick him off. But then who are you going to start kicking off? Ewing, Robinson, I suppose Stockton, So it's, to me, the more interesting argument is which of the 2008, 2012 guys would make the Dream Team. And certainly you start with LeBron and Kobe. Anybody that says LeBron and Kobe wouldn't be on that team is crazy. Of course they would. Of course they would. But you still got to kick 2 guys off. You got to kick Laettner and you got to kick one other guy off. So
I understand. Okay. So after a very few games, Draxler and Stockton got injured. So my thought back then, more than 30 years ago, was wow, they need another point guard here. So can you explain us how come Isaiah Thomas was not on the team?
Well, the Isaiah Thomas question is, of course, the number one ask about the Dream Team, and it is both a simple answer and a complicated answer. And the reason that it is a simple answer is Michael Jordan, no matter what he says or anybody else says, really did not want Isaiah on the team. As a corollary to that, either did Scottie Pippen, no matter what he says, either did Magic Johnson, either did Charles Barkley. So Isaiah did not have the kind of support that one would need to put him on the team. And had this team was being chosen basically in 1991. At that point, the Chicago Bulls had become the team in the NBA. They went on to win the championship. The Pistons, who had won the championship in 89 and 90, were gone. They were injured. The Bulls beat them in 4 straight games to win the Eastern Conference title. So Bill Laimbeer, one of Isaiah's teammates, always said to me the most interesting thing about this, which was, if they were picking the team in 89 or 90, when the Pistons are still the kings of the league, they're winning championships, they still beat the Bulls, would they have been able to keep Isaiah off the team then? That, to me, is an interesting question. More complicated than in 1991, it was easy. You know, the number one guy you needed for the Dream Team was Michael Jordan. That's what you needed. And he was number one. He expressed the opinion that, look, if I'm going to take my summer off and I'm going to do this, and I don't need this for promotion, I'm already selling sneakers all over the world. I want to feel that I'm on a team with great chemistry and everybody likes everybody. Isaiah Thomas did not fit that formula as far as Michael Jordan was concerned. So to anybody who says, well, that wasn't fair that Isaiah wasn't on the team, I would say that if you were back in 1991 and you had to choose between Michael Jordan and Isaiah Thomas, who would you have chosen? And anybody who says, well, I would have picked Isaiah and told Michael Jordan to go to hell, I would say, well, good luck, but I think you're full of shit. I don't think you would have said that. I think you would have taken Jordan. That's what you would have done.
Well, you also mentioned something else very interesting, that is Christian Laettner. To me, Christian Laettner in that team just makes no sense because Christian Laettner was never a superstar. So they could have picked, my choice of a player from university would have been LaFonso Ellis because, as I mentioned, they needed another point guard or another guard. Second option would have been, of course, Shaquille O'Neal. Third option, if they wanted the power forward, would have been Tom Gugliotta to me. So why did they pick Christian Laettner? It just makes no sense to me.
Well, first of all, the move to have a college player, you have to. Why did a better question is why did they have any college players? They could have had Isaiah, they could have had James Worthy, they could have had Joe Dumars, they could have had Dominique Wilkins. Well, they started out this whole selection thing with the idea that they were going to have 8 pros and 4 college players because, as I said, this idea that college kids were our Olympic teams was very strongly ingrained in the American consciousness. Well, our college kids are the ones that play in the Olympics, man. I don't care that Russia's coming on and Lithuania is going to be good and Croatia is going to be good. Our college kids are the one that do it. So they started out with the idea it was going to be 8 and 4. And then they started putting names on the board. Holy crap, we're not going to be able to have David Robinson. We're not going to be able to. So then they got it down to 9-3. Then they get it down to 10-2. Then they finally get it sensibly to 11-1. And Laettner, I think you're undervaluing, first of all, what a great college player Christian Laettner was. Everybody with a brain knew that Laettner would be one of these players. I don't know whether they have him in Italy, but that you look at and you say, well, at the next level, he's not going to be as good. But
Okay.
Leitner as a college player, unbelievable player. They had won 2 NCAA championships. Leitner did whatever he wanted in college. He played inside, he played outside. And most importantly, Christian Leitner, unlike Shaq, who I love Shaq, and the other guys, Leitner had been the one to play on the junior teams. He had been the one to take these crappy trips to, I'm making this up, but Bulgaria and all these other sites where they were playing these sort of amateur tournaments. So Leitner had been a guy that USA Basketball had counted on. So you combine great college player, had done the stuff, the hard work for USA Basketball. His own coach, Mike Krzyzewski, was going to be one of the assistants. And number 4 factor, they didn't really need. You mentioned, another point guard. First of all, Drexler and Stockton weren't hurt yet. Drexler and Stockton got hurt during the tournament. So we didn't really need anybody. It's not like, oh, hell, if you were going to need, well, we really need a center. If for some reason David Robinson or Patrick Ewing couldn't play, we need a physical dominating center. Well, then they would have gone and picked Shaq. But the 12th pick was sort of a guy, let's take the guy who kind of deserves to be here on the basis of, as I said, the USA Basketball trips that he had made and the fact that he really was a great college player. So at the time, it didn't seem all that strange. I certainly understand 30 years later, we're going, what? Christian Leitner over Shaquille O'Neal? That's insane. But at the time the pick was made, it wasn't so much a reflection of who's going to be great in the pros or we need a great player. It was more the combination of being a great college player and the one that had paid his dues with USA Basketball.
Once they started playing, what was the feeling in the arenas, in the public? Because actually, they were exhibition games because it was clear from the very beginning who the winner would have been. So it was not very competitive.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the first time they played together was they had to, because they had, the backstory to all this was that the 88 Olympics was finally the point when America realized, oh, crap, we're not our college kids are not good enough to beat the best players from the Soviet Union, the best players from Croatia, the best player. Well, the countries weren't split yet, but we certainly could not beat the best Soviet Union team and the best Yugoslav team. We could not. It's another question whether we would have beaten the best team from Spain, the best team from Italy. So that was the kind of backstory that we had to qualify for the Olympics in '92. So they had a qualifying tournament in Portland, Oregon in July or the end of June. And at that point, there was, I can't remember who exactly there, but the first game they were going to play was against Cuba. So nobody thought Cuba's going to beat them. I mean, nobody thought, but we were all anxious to see what this whole symphony was going to look like when it got together. And so they come out and Cuba stops practicing. They stopped their layup drill to watch, the dream team come out. Then they were taking pictures. So then the United States comes out and just crushes them from the beginning. So from that point on, those of us who were covering it and those of us, people in the stands who understood basketball, just kind of went, well, this is something else. This isn't your normal definition of competition. To me, the way I likened it was it's sort of like a play, like a theatrical performance, like Death of a Salesman is a great American play, which has been put on 5,000 times. So now you're going to see Death of a Salesman knowing exactly what happens, knowing the lines from the play, but you're going to see the little nuances, the way that this actor does it different from this actor, the way that this director did it. So from that point on, it became a performance rather than an athletic competition. And if you looked at it like that, I think you were okay. But if you came into the arena and you gave a damn about oh, let's see if Germany can beat if you came in with that idea, then you were going to be disappointed. So you had to start looking at it in a different way.
And probably even the opponents were doing that.
Well, I don't think, look, I can't get into the head of all the opponents. My guess is the one team that was a little different was Croatia, because they had Petrovic. And Drazen Petrovic was one of those guys that was like, I don't give a shit what you tell me about Michael Jordan. I'm as good as them. We're going to beat them. And he was the one guy that, probably made playing Croatia maybe a little bit different. But everybody else kind of knew the score. And they wanted to go out there and play the best they could. But what they were mostly doing was making memories. That here's my picture with Magic before the game. So it's a different kind of competition, and it changed very rapidly, as we're sure we'll talk about in the coming years. It became something pretty different pretty quickly.
Well, Croatia didn't only have Petrovic. They also had Dino Radja, who was playing for the Boston Celtics. They had Arjan Komazek, who was playing in Italy, but was very good. And they also had one other iconic player, who's Toni Kukoc. And I would like to ask you something, because in your book, you describe Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan as rabid dogs when they had to play against Kukoc. Why were they so mad at him? They were supposed to be almost teammates.
Well, you have to understand that the one thing NBA players, professional players, maybe it's the same in Italy, don't mess with their wallet. Don't mess with my contract. So what was going on at the time was that the Chicago Bulls general manager, this guy named Jerry Krause, a very sort of strange, Jerry died, but very strange guy that operated secretively and always knew and kind of had found Scottie Pippen. He had kind of found, Scottie at this obscure college, and other people liked him, but nobody liked him as much as Jerry did. Anyway, Jerry Krause at the time was courting Toni Kukoc. And the idea was whether or not, I was never able to ascertain, or I don't remember, whether they literally would have had to unload Pippen to get Toni. But the way that Pippen saw it was that Jerry Krause was courting Toni Kukoc in a way that led them to think that I'm disposable. We're going to get rid of me. So it was personal. And so the other thing about this team was that to get motivated for the games, they had to come up with stuff. They didn't, the Knicks Bulls, they played the Knicks 7 times during the year. They hated them. It's not hard for us to build up some motivation. So they didn't really have any motivation. So what they did was build this. Scottie started talking to everybody, and by the time it was done, the entire team wanted to crush poor Toni Kukoc, who had just got caught in the middle of this. The cliche is the perfect storm. It was they needed motivation. They didn't like Jerry Krause anyway. Croatia's supposed to be pretty good. and Tony Kukoc is trying to take Scottie Pippen's money. So it just, all this stuff rained down upon Kukoc. And when I talked to him about it, it was sort of like, hey, man, I didn't know what was going on. I remember Kukoc told me his wife was pregnant at the time and she was going to go into labor. I think subsequently she had a baby very close to that game. So Tony's mind is, he just wants to get through the game. He wants to get through the game without embarrassing himself or staying within 30 points of these guys and have my wife come out of labor successfully and they come out on the court to kill him. So I really felt for Kukoc in that game. I don't think we understood at the press. I don't think we understood at the time what was going on. I mean, we didn't, as I recall, we didn't hear this, oh my God, Scotty's coming out to destroy Kukoc. And the other thing was, Scottie Pippen's one of the great defensive players there ever was. I mean, and if you put him and Jordan together to try to stop somebody, they're going to stop him.
Yeah,
I don't care. I don't care who it is. I mean, the closest guy to ever maybe be able to get away from him, and we never were able to see it, was Kobe, I suppose, because Kobe would just keep shooting until he figured out a way. But you put Jordan and Pippen together on somebody, it's over. I don't care who it is. And that particular night, it was Tony Kukoc.
How was the feeling, the mood inside the team? Were they considering each other allies or enemies? Because a few weeks after, at the NBA Finals, Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan played against Clyde Drexler, and the rivalry was pretty harsh.
Yeah, well, that was before the... before the Olympics. Somebody described it to me as this sort of perfect little village that was put together for a limited amount of time, that everybody understood, everybody worried. The worry was, there were two worries, I would say. Number one, that our long distance shooting would go awry and there would be some sharpshooter from Germany or Croatia or somebody that could pull an upset, which subsequently happened later. Greece beat them in a world championship game, because they kept running a pick and roll and guys kept hitting 25-foot shots. That was a worry. And number two was that the ego would get in the way. Well, when they got together, they did the opposite. They all gave up a part of their game. So that became kind of not a problem. They always had a go-to guy with Jordan if they needed to win, or Barkley was the number two option. Nobody could stop Barkley. They didn't have there was nobody equipped defensively to stop Barkley over there, never mind Jordan. So they always knew that, they had an out position with those guys, and they basically all buried their egos. But as Larry Bird told me years later, he said, look, it was a perfect amount of time. We were together for 6 weeks. By the time we were done, you started to hear little things. Oh, Chuck Daly didn't play me as much. Oh, Clyde got 10 minutes and you were starting to hear the little gripes. And Bird was the only one honest enough to admit that to me, that the perfect little world that had been created could have come apart, because that's what happens to teams. I mean, teams are together for a long time. They get together in October. By the time playoff teams reach June, there's been 150 little subplots, little crap in the media, little stuff on social media, little hints, little things that happen in the meetings, little arguments that happened in practice, little skirmishes. And all that stuff is reduced when you're together for this common goal for only like 6 weeks. So I think the dream team, as all national teams, now it's a little different. the national teams understand they got to get together for a longer period of time. It's more of a grind. There's a tryout process. I mean, LeBron, and Kevin Durant and Kobe didn't have to try out. Other guys are trying out. That didn't happen with the Dream Team. The Dream Team was picked. Here's our guys. We're going to Portland to qualify. Then we're going to Monte Carlo to have practice and gamble and drink. Then we're going to Barcelona to kick ass for, what do they got to win? 8 games to win the gold medal. End of story. It's more of an arduous task right now, I would say.
So we mentioned Isaiah Thomas before, but we also have another player who never made it to the national team because of his attitude. Because if you check the best power forward of the 90s, you have Karl Malone, you have Sean Kemp, and the third would be Dennis Rodman, who never made it to the national team because he's totally crazy. Can you imagine, did Dennis Rodman ruin his own career with his own hands?
Well, if you're talking about two different questions of if you were talking about, was Dennis Rodman a candidate for the 92 Dream Team? No. At that point, he wasn't established enough. I think Dennis was a rookie in 88, maybe. Somebody's going to look it up and say this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So Dennis is only in the league at that point, 3 or 4 times, and he was very much on the Piston teams that had beat the Bulls. Dennis was how would I put it? A subsidiary type of player, defensive specialist, rebounder, which, by the way, is what he kind of remained. But he wasn't at that point, it was Isaiah's team. It was Joe Dumars' team. It was Vinnie Johnson's team. It was Lambier's team. So Dennis is kind of in the background. Dennis exploded, in the mid-90s with the Bulls team. And so in my opinion, what you're asking, did he hurt his career by doing what he did? My answer to that, first of all, is yes. I think that, he certainly hurt his legacy. On the other hand, you could argue that he became more famous. That he wouldn't have been the guy to go to North Korea with an exhibition team had some obscure guy from the 90s suggested, hey, I'm going over to meet Kim Jong-un and we're going to have an exhibition game. They would have said, what the hell are you talking about? And who gives a crap? But because it was Dennis Rodman, it was, kind of an international story. So Dennis is a two-edged sword, what he did with his reputation. And I think it comes down on the fact that he hurt himself. But somebody else might say, if he sought to become a public figure and to become famous and to hang out in Vegas, then he succeeded. But right now, I don't know how happy Dennis is. I mean, if you took him to, let's compare him and Charles Barkley. Loose cannons, got in trouble, some bar fights. Now, Charles was a better player than Dennis. But Charles never quite burned the bridges, right? Charles never quite left the team in the middle of the season to go to Vegas. Charles never quite, went as far as Dennis did. And now Charles, 15, 18 years after he hung up his sneakers, is a major figure in American culture. They're talking about giving him a talk show on CNN. So Dennis burned bridges. Charles burned some bridges, but not to the extent that Dennis did. So, if you compare those two people, I would say that, Dennis went too far in the other direction and did hurt, whatever chances he did of remaining a figure in our culture. And I don't know what he's doing. I hope he's happy, because Dennis had some real demons to deal with, in my opinion.
Well, after a few years, after 10 years, the Dream Team craze kind of faded because America lost in 2002 the World Cup, in 2006 the World Cup, and in 2004 the Olympics. What happened? How did it fade so quickly?
Well, we didn't take, it was what I was saying. We approached the national team in subsequent years up until the teams you started talking about before, 2008, 2012. So let's take those years right after the Dream Team was done, the first one. We still approach the Dream Team, the national team, the same way. We don't need tryouts. We don't really need a unified program. We don't need one coach. We don't need an organizational committee. We don't need tryouts. We'll just pick an all-star team. And we'll go over and we'll beat the Italians and we'll beat the Spaniards and we'll beat whatever federation Russia's put. We're still going to beat them because we have NBA players. Okay, it kind of works in 96, but, you know, you mentioned Sean Kemp and Hakeem was on that team. They were a terrible chemistry team if you got inside that team. They were not together. They won on talent. Because they were still great. You know, they still had best players in the world. 2000 we get to, we're still picking the team the same way. And now we almost get beat, you know, over in Australia in a game. Well, then suddenly it all falls apart. Spain, and I think of them first, has a great system. They have a bunch of guys that have played together since they're 9, 10 years old. And they have this idea of the Spanish national team. They have a concept of it. It's a thing. America didn't have that. It was still, we're going to pick an all-star team and we're going to go to the Olympics and we're still going to beat everybody. Well, 2004 comes along. You mentioned 2002. America still never paid as much attention to the World Championships or anything else FIFA did as they did the Olympics. For the America, it was the Olympics, what was in our head. So we get to 2004, we go to Greece. Our backcourt is Iverson and Marbury, who can't guard me and you know, even though they're all-stars. And all of a sudden we go, oh crap, we're not only in a little bit in trouble, we're in big trouble. You know, we got to get this shit together. We got to get a program. We got to get a coach. We got to get committed guys. And so what happened was, you know, sort of the same thing that happened in 88 when we lose. We got to improve. We got to get our guys. So they get Krzyzewski. Krzyzewski instills a kind of new feeling. LeBron, thank God, you know, buys in. Kevin Durant buys in. Bunch of, you know, other young players buy in. And we start to put it together again. That's why, you know, in response to the first question you asked about the 2012 team, whether or not the 2012 team was as good as the Dream Team, I would still say no. However, I would say this. What the 2008 team achieved and what the 2012 team achieved and what the 2016 team achieved were a far greater achievement than what the Dream Team achieved. Because at this point, they're beating NBA teams. You know,
oh yeah,
they're beating teams that would finish that, I don't know if this is true or not, might have a good chance of making the playoffs in the NBA if you took that Spanish team, you know, and had Yugoslavia. I mean, my God, if the Soviet bloc had stayed together, you know, the combination of Russia and Yugoslavia teams I would have liked to seen that team play the Dream Team or play the Kobe and LeBron Redeem teams. So that's what happened. The U.S. had to rethink its whole philosophy. And right now, you know, Krzyzewski's not the coach anymore. LeBron's old. Kevin Durant we don't know what team he's on, according to what week it is. So they need a new direction. And they need somebody young to buy in. And to me, the key of the American teams going forward is probably Zion Williamson. They need somebody to say, this is important to me. Come on, let's get our guys. Let's get everybody together. Let's play together. Let's win this. Otherwise, they're going to get beat. No question about it.
I have my personal opinion on this. I think that the NBA is getting more similar to the NHL, meaning that, of course, the NBA and the NHL are both the best leagues in the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the national team is the strongest in the world, because the rest of the world is catching up. So as in hockey, sometimes Canada wins, Russia wins, Norway wins, or Sweden wins. Maybe the same can happen in basketball, with the NBA still being the greatest league, but sometimes we have to get used to the fact that sometimes Australia wins, sometimes Spain wins, and so on. What do you think?
Yeah, no question. First of all, you're raising something interesting here, which I don't know the answer to. Is the NHL considered clearly the best league in the world?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah. Well, see, the United States fan, or typical, person who pays attention to sports, we don't have as much a sense of that because, hardcore NHL fans do, but hockey is still kind of a Canadian, that the best players are still from Canada, that they're not homemade from the United States. We still have the idea, the general fan, not the sports writer in the thing, that the NBA is peopled by stars that are American born, which is not even true. The best players, LeBron's, leaving now. LeBron's 37 or 38 years old. He's going to be gone soon. Steph Curry is banged up every year. That's why he's not a real national. The guy gets to the end of the season and he's got to sleep from June to October to even be able to come back on the court. So the best players in the NBA are from other places. Jokic, Doncic, all these guys are from some other place. So if the American fan does not understand why our national team does not dominate anymore, that person's not paying attention. Because far international players are dominating our league. Not fully, but they are some of the best players in our league. So the fact that our national team isn't dominating anymore, the question is, do we accept it? And do we care? We still cared. We cared after we got our ass kicked in 2004. That's why we appointed Krzyzewski. That's why we got a national program. That's why Jerry Colangelo became the executive director of USA Basketball, a very powerful guy in American basketball. That's why players like LeBron and Kobe and Kevin Durant and Chris Paul and Carmelo Anthony made this kind of commitment that we don't want to let America, sink to 2 or 3 in the world, or 4. I don't know whether that exists now, because these guys right now are so used to international players. It's almost like, Luka Doncic. It's almost like he's a kid from the Los Angeles playgrounds. He's not thought of as an international player anymore. So I think there's more of an acceptance of an international game, and therefore the idea that we're going to lose to an international team is not so god-awful foreign to the American mentality anymore. The idea back in 92, when I was covering this team, and you probably weren't very old, the idea that we were going to lose, it was unthinkable. It was, it was the furthest thought from anybody's mind. But right now, it's not that way at all. And that's fine, man. Things change. The world changes. The idea that we would see Luka Doncic, if we would see somebody like him just dominating the American game and playing the way that we think we should play, doing all the things that a great player does that you used to think, well, hell, only an American player can do that. That's now become standard operating procedure in our game.
Definitely. Well, Jack, many thanks for your time again. This interview was very fun. Thanks for your very precious explanations. I'm gonna recommend everybody to buy and read this book. This is the American version, but there's also an Italian translation available in bookstores.
Thanks for having me. And buy the people still seem, no matter what I've written since then, all anybody remembers me for is the Dream Team. So I guess I'm glad they came along, or nobody would know my name. So thanks for having me.
No worries, no problem. And yes, I recommend everybody actually to read all your books, definitely. Thanks everybody for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.